Okay, and I need to stick on here that Andersonville was a Confederate prison. I'm going to put Confederate. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the other prison, which is Elmira. Where can I put it? I'll put it right here. Elmira. The prison at Elmira was the most notorious of the Union prisons. So this is a Union prison. Meant to hold 5,000 men, it eventually housed more than 10,000 as the war progressed. So it too was overcrowded. Like Andersonville, it was not used as a prison until 1864, when others became too overcrowded. Although well water was used for the prisoners, a small pond located in the prison acted as the location for human waste and any other waste associated with the prison. As the prison population swelled, the pond became polluted. Okay, so let me add this to it. Andersonville had a creek. Elmira had a pond. But they just got so polluted they just couldn't use them anymore. The stench could be detected outside the prison. During the spring of 1865, a nearby river swelled over its banks, running into the prison. It spread the waste from the pond throughout the camp. What made Elmira so bad for the prisoners was its location. New York gets really cold in the wintertime. The facilities at the prison were not adequate for so many, and as a result, a large number of prisoners had to sleep outside. Now you have to realize, okay, this is a Union prison, so the people in there are from the South. And the people in the South aren't used to the cold anyway. Okay, so the weather gets cold. So cold weather. Many of them had to sleep outside. You ever slept outside in the winter? It's cold here too. As winter set in, many prisoners became ill and died from exposure. Okay, so many of them died from exposure. It was not uncommon to have prisoners standing outside in bare feet during a snowstorm for a morning roll call. The treatment of prisoners at Elmira is a matter of much contention. The North was not suffering economically like the South and should have been better prepared to handle the needs of POWs. In some cases, it is alleged that those responsible for running the camp refused to provide adequate housing, clothing, food, and medical supplies to the prisoners. So, unlike Andersonville, Elmira, they just refused. It's not that they didn't have the money. It's not that the supplies weren't there. They just didn't want to help the South. In any event, the brutal winter of upstate New York took a heavy toll of malnourished prisoners. By the time Elmira closed, about 1 year after accepting prisoners, nearly 3,000 men had died from disease and exposure. Okay, so from Elmira, about 3,000 died. That's a 3, by the way. It is estimated that as many as 55,000 men died in North and South prisoner of camp war camps. Okay, 30 and 26, that's 56,000, so that's close. Although there were cases of abuse on both sides, most fatalities resulted because neither one was prepared to handle such an enormous number of men. The end of prison exchange only deepened the problem. Either way, the treatment of POWs during the Civil War was poor at best, and it became a black mark on American history. So there are many cases of abuse. I want to put abuse up here. Both sides were accused of abusing their prisoners of war. Let's review. Okay. We talked about prison life. When they're arrested, the first thing they do is go to a holding pen where they take their names and their units. And then there's 100 different prison camps. They're overcrowded. They were the last to receive any provisions. There's a lot of claims of abuse. They had a prisoner exchange system, which kept the prisons lower. But then there was allegations that the Confederates were mistreating black prisoner of wars, and so Grant refused to exchange any more prisoners until the blacks were treated the same as whites. And when the Confederates refused, Grant wouldn't exchange any more prisoners. During the war, the Confederates lost about 26,000 prisoners out of 215,000 prisoners. About 30,000 died in federal prisons, the northern prisons. There was in Fort Delaware, the commandant just refused to feed the people, refused to get them a medical condition. He just refused to help them. The food they ate was mainly cornmeal, salt pork or salt beef, bread, and every once in a while vegetables. But as the war went on, by the time they got the food, it was already spoiled and it had maggots in it. There are two notorious prisons. There's Anderson, which is a Confederate prison camp. It was also called Camp Sumter. It had 16 acres, but then they had to increase the size of it to 26 acres. 12,000 prisoners died here. Henry Wirtz was the commander. After the war, he was arrested for war crimes and he was hanged. Okay. Andersonville had a creek, which was fresh water at first, but then it became so polluted you just couldn't drink out of it. The other prison, the other notorious prison, was Elmira, and it was a Union prison. It had a pond, but again, it became very polluted. Elmira is in New York, so they have cold winters, so the weather was cold, and the prisoners had to sleep outside because they just didn't have enough room, and so many people died of exposure. The commandant of the prison refused to provide the necessary provisions for the prisoners, and about 3,000 died in that prison, and it was only opened a year. Okay, so today we talked a lot about prison life. Make sure that you study your lesson, study your notes, and go ahead and answer the questions.